Opening. Darkness over the land of the dragon. Today, when we hear the name Dracula, most of us immediately think of the image of an immortal vampire wandering through the mist-shrouded castles of Transylvania. Yet few know that behind that legend once stood a flesh and blood man, a prince, a warrior, a ruler, who turned fear itself into a deadly weapon. He lives not only in history books, but also in the collective memory of Europe as a figure half hero, half monster, Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler. Today, I invite you on a special journey. We will turn back the clock to the 15th century, when Europe trembled before the advance of the Ottoman Empire, and frontier lands like Wallachia became the battleground between two worlds, Christianity and Islam. This is a story not only of war and power, but also of loyalty, betrayal, and the harsh choices that forced a man to become someone history would forever call by names both feared and despised. Before we begin, I want you to forget what Hollywood has told you. Let me, as a historian, bring you closer to the real man behind the name Dracula, a story that may make you realize that sometimes truth is far more terrifying than fiction. So, prepare yourself. We begin in the winter of 1431 in a small fortified town called Sigishora, where a child was born under the sign of the dragon and also the mark of the devil. Part 1. Transylvania and Wallachia in the shadow of the Ottomans. If you open a map of Europe in the 15th century, your eyes will be drawn to a narrow strip of land wedged between the mighty Carpathian Mountains and the winding Danube River. At first glance, it looks like a fragile bridge, a bridge linking East and West, Christianity and Islam. That bridge was called Wallachia. To the north and west of Wallachia lay Transylvania, a land encircled by treacherous mountains, dense forests, and ancient stone fortresses. But in the 15th century, this was no tourist destination. It was the front line of a life and death struggle. At that time, the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II and later Mehmed II, the Conqueror, was extending its iron grip across the Balkans. After seizing Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II threw open the gates for Islam to push deep into Europe. Each Ottoman advance was not only a military occupation, but also brought with it Islamic law, tribute demands, and the formidable Janissary corps. With its position along the Danube, Wallachia became the living shield of Europe. But this shield was fragile, for to the north, the Kingdom of Hungary also sought to control it. Two giant powers, two opposing faiths, each wanted to stamp its authority on this small land. It was during this period that the Order of the Dragon was founded, a knightly alliance created in 1408 by King Sigismund of Hungary, with the primary aim of defending Europe from the Ottoman tide. Members bore on their chest the emblem of a coiled dragon, both a mark of honor and a blood oath. One such member was Vlad II, the father of Vlad Dracula. Joining the order was not only an honor, but also a political talisman. The title Dracul, the dragon, was added to his name from that moment. Yet in Romanian at the time, Dracul could also mean the devil, a noble emblem, and a dark shadow. I have always believed that to understand a person, we must look at the land that raised them. 15th century Wallachia was no peaceful countryside. It was the edge of the Christian world, where every political decision was weighed between loyalty and survival. In that setting, a child named Vlad was born. He would inherit not only the bloodline of a dragon knight, but also the storm of two clashing worlds, he would grow to understand that here, to survive, one needed not only sword and spear, but also the ability to sow fear. Part 2. Blood of the Dragon and the Devil. A childhood in political intrigue. In the winter of 1431, in the fortified town of Sighișoara, Transylvania, a child was born, the second son of Vlad II Dracula. Vlad II was a man of the frontier, a figure forever balancing between two powers, Hungary to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south. Membership in the Order of the Dragon draped him in honor, but to the locals, the word Dracula also meant devil. Naturally, his newborn son was called Dracula, the son of the dragon, or the son of the devil. The boy grew up amid the sounds of Saxon merchants speaking German, Hungarian mercenaries, and Ottoman prisoners being marched through the streets. It was a living school of politics, where every banquet carried an undercurrent of power. Vlad II was a pragmatic man. Chronicles record him switching allegiances multiple times, not from lack of principle, but for the survival of his family and his land. Vlad's childhood was also shaped by the boyars, Wallachian nobles who controlled land, armies, and often enough, the fate of rulers. From them, young Vlad learned a ruthless lesson. Power rests not on trust, but on the ability to make betrayal too costly to attempt. In 1436, when Vlad was just 5, his father won the throne of Wallachia. The family moved to Târgoviște, the capital, lying right on the Ottoman border. There, Vlad watched his father greet Hungarian envoys with wine, and also bow to receive the Sultan's seal for temporary peace. These diplomatic rituals etched themselves into Vlad's mind as survival lessons. To keep the throne, you must know the rules of both worlds, and be ready to strike when the moment comes. No one then could have imagined that the thin boy with the dark, deep-set eyes would turn those childhood lessons into the foundation for a reign that would terrify Europe and free his country from the grip of an empire. Part 3. The Ottoman Captivity, a forge of blood and iron. In the spring of 1442, when Vlad was only 11, the shadow of politics fell over his childhood. His father, under immense pressure from Sultan Mehmed II, agreed to a grim bargain. Vlad and his younger brother Radu were sent to the Ottomans as political hostages. From that moment, Vlad's life changed forever. He was no longer a free prince, but an honored prisoner. At the palace of Edirne, Vlad was educated in the Ottoman mold, learning Turkish, studying the Quran, and military strategy. Most importantly, he trained with the elite Janissaries, soldiers taken as Christian boys, converted to Islam, and forged into a deadly corps. Here, Vlad learned to ride war horses, shoot arrows, and wield the scimitar in brutal training bouts. But the school of the Ottomans taught not only martial skill, it taught fear. From his window, Vlad may have seen the impalements of traitors, sharpened stakes designed to keep victims alive for hours or days in excruciating agony. These scenes seared into the boy's mind as both trauma and a lesson. Fear could subdue more people than kindness ever could. While Vlad harbored hatred, his brother Radu adapted easily. Handsome and charming, Radu became the Sultan's favorite, earning the title Radu the Handsome and turning into a political tool of the empire. This difference would plant the seeds for future family tragedy. Modern historians see Vlad's years in Edirne as a psychological turning point. He absorbed the Ottoman discipline, understood how the empire used public violence to rule, and, most importantly, learned that fear was a universal language. Somewhere in the Ottoman capital, an unspoken vow took shape. When I return, I will take back everything in blood. Part 4. Father lost, throne lost. The blood oath of an exiled prince. In 1447, grim news travelled across hundreds of miles to the young prince in captivity. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was dead. The end had come through betrayal. The Boyars, allied with Hungarian forces under the influence of John Hunyadi, struck down Vlad II. At the same time, Vlad's elder brother, Mircea, was captured, tortured, and buried alive. In that moment, Vlad lost everything: his family, his throne, and his homeland. But he did not lose his will. Historians believe this was the moment when a steel-hard resolve crystallized within him, not only to reclaim his throne, but to exact blood payment from every betrayer. In 1448, Sultan Mehmed II released Vlad, providing him with a contingent of troops. He struck quickly, defeating his enemies and seizing the title of voivode. But within 2 months, Hungarian forces counterattacked, forcing Vlad to flee. Thus began his years of exile. He sought refuge in Moldavia, only to be driven to Hungary, where fate placed him in the path of John Hunyadi, the very man indirectly responsible for his father's death. History, at times, has a cruel sense of irony. To reclaim his throne, Vlad would have to work alongside an old enemy. During these years, Vlad sharpened 3 key weapons: cold-blooded political skill, a hybrid mastery of military tactics, and the survival instincts of a frontier warlord. The years of loss transformed him into a foe both the Ottomans and the Hungarians learned to fear. In the icy nights of a Hungarian fortress, perhaps Vlad whispered again the vow he had made as a boy: "When I return, not only will the throne be mine, but the blood of traitors will stain the soil of Wallachia." Part 5. The Bloody Return. Purging the Boyars and building absolute power. In 1456, the moment Vlad had awaited finally came. John Hunyadi was dead. The new Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, needed a hard-edged ally on the borderlands, and he saw in Vlad Dracula the perfect man, fueled by hatred, tempered by experience. Backed by Hungary, Vlad led his army across the Danube to confront Vladislav II, the usurper who had once taken his crown. Chronicles tell that Vlad himself killed Vladislav in single combat. With that final blow, the road to the throne lay open. But Vlad's true consolidation of power came not on the battlefield, but at a banquet. Within months of reclaiming his throne, he invited the boyar elite to Targovište for an Easter feast. When the celebrations ended, instead of farewells, his soldiers burst in and seized them all. The young and able-bodied were forced to march dozens of miles to Poenari fortress, where they laboured under brutal conditions to rebuild it as a defensive citadel. The old, the infirm, and those with known histories of treachery were executed on the spot, impaled without hesitation. Vlad then imposed draconian laws: theft, deceit, idleness, all punishable by death on the stake. Legend says he placed a golden cup by a public fountain in Targovište. Anyone could drink from it, but no one dared steal it. The price of order was a fear that gripped the entire nation. Within a few years, chaotic Wallachia became a centralized fortress state. Once the domestic enemies were crushed, Vlad turned his gaze outward. His next target, the wealthy Saxon cities of Transylvania. Part 6. Enemies Beyond. Vengeance on the Saxons and the politics of the border. With internal foes eliminated, Vlad turned north toward the Saxon cities of Transylvania, prosperous trade hubs that, in his eyes, harboured political enemies and gave refuge to rebellious boyars. Towns like Brasov and Sibiu repeatedly refused to hand over traitors at Vlad's demand. In 1459, he sent a message written in blood and fire. Leading his forces across the Carpathians, he struck the outskirts of Brasov, burning villages and capturing hundreds. Contemporary records speak of the sight that awaited the townsfolk. Hundreds of impaled corpses erected before Brasov's gates, a wall of death visible from afar. This was not mere vengeance. It was a calculated warning. Any who sheltered Vlad's enemies would pay dearly. Vlad understood that on the frontier, victory depended on spreading fear beyond one's borders. Merchants returning from Wallachia carried tales of the forest of stakes. In German lands, woodcut prints began portraying him as a literal demon, inadvertently magnifying his reputation. The Saxon campaigns revealed his broader strategy: control trade, and you control the flow of resources for war, destroy the sanctuaries of your foes, and you stabilize your rule at home. These expeditions were also a proving ground for his army, a prelude to facing a far greater threat: the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II. The real storm was yet to come. Part 7. The Great War of 1462. The Forest of Stakes and Psychological Warfare with Mehmed II. In 1462, the thunder of hooves rolled up from the south. This time, the threat was Sultan Mehmed II himself, conqueror of Constantinople. The spark was Vlad's refusal to pay tribute to the Ottomans. He did not simply decline, he nailed the turbans of Ottoman envoys to their skulls. As if to fan the flames, he launched a daring raid into Ottoman lands, slaughtering tens of thousands. Mehmed's response was swift and overwhelming. In the summer of 1462, he marched north with nearly 100,000 troops. Facing an army that dwarfed his own, Vlad adopted a scorched earth policy, burning villages, poisoning wells, and evacuating the population into the mountains. The Ottomans advanced into Wallachia only to find a wasteland. On the night of June 17, 1462, Vlad struck back with his boldest move: a night raid into the Ottoman camp, aiming to kill the Sultan himself. He failed to assassinate Mehmed, but inflicted heavy casualties and shattered enemy morale. When Mehmed pushed onward to Targovishte, he encountered a scene so horrific that it was recorded even in Ottoman chronicles. Before him stretched a field of over 20,000 impaled bodies, arranged in precise ranks. The wind rattled the corpses. The stench of death hung thick in the air. This was the infamous Forest of Stakes. According to accounts, Mehmed declared that no man could conquer a country ruled by such a leader, and he withdrew, not from military defeat, but from the psychological blow of such calculated savagery. The 1462 campaign proved Vlad's mastery of asymmetric warfare. Yet the cost to Wallachia was devastating, and soon Vlad would lose his throne, not to Mehmed, but to his own brother, Radu. Part 8. Betrayal, imprisonment, and a mysterious death. The War of 1462 left Wallachia exhausted. In this weakened state, Radu the Handsome returned, backed by the Ottomans and supported by factions of boyars, promising peace. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Vlad fled to Hungary, seeking the protection of King Matthias Corvinus. But instead of aid, he found chains. The reasons remain debated: Ottoman pressure or Matthias's fear of Vlad's ruthless reputation. Vlad spent 12 long years in Hungarian fortresses, Records suggest he kept his cruelty alive even in captivity, catching birds and mice, then impaling them. In 1476, under papal pressure, Matthias released Vlad to reclaim his throne. Vlad did so for the third time, but the triumph was fleeting. Within 2 months, near Bucharest, Vlad fell in battle against Ottoman forces. The details of his death remain shrouded. Some say he was surrounded and slain. Others that his own men betrayed him. His end was grim. His head was severed, sent to Constantinople, and displayed on a stake as a trophy for Sultan Mehmed II. Vlad's final resting place has never been confirmed, a mystery that only deepened the legend. Part 9. Legacy. Hero or monster. More than half a millennium has passed. In Romania, many still revere Vlad as a national hero, the man who checked the Ottoman advance and upheld strict order. In folk tales, he appears as a stern but just voivode. In the West, however, he became a byword for brutality. German woodcuts depicted him as the devil incarnate, and such images spread quickly, making Vlad one of Europe's earliest media sensations. The turning point came in 1897, when Irish novelist Bram Stoker published Dracula. Though his vampire count was not a direct portrait of Vlad Tepes, he borrowed the name Dracula, cloaking it in the image of an immortal predator. From then on, in the popular imagination, Vlad's name was bound to darkness and bloodlust. Today, traces of Vlad remain. The ruins of Poenari fortress, the remnants of Targovishti, and historical records that speak to the brutal realities of Europe's 15th century frontiers. So, hero or monster? The question has followed Vlad for over 500 years. To Romanians, he was a shield. To contemporary Westerners, he was the Impaler. To modern historians, he was a product of his age, a time when survival often demanded ruthless choices. Perhaps Vlad was neither purely hero nor wholly monster. He was a ruler of the frontier, where mercy was often ground to dust beneath the wheels of politics and war. A whisper from the past. More than 5 centuries on, the shadow of Vlad Dracula still lingers over the Carpathian peaks, drifting through the mists of ruined fortresses. He lived and ruled on the edge of 2 worlds, where every decision carried the scent of blood, and survival meant wielding fear as a weapon. History does not allow for simple judgments. Vlad was both a defender of Europe's borders and a bringer of terror to friend and foe alike. He stands as proof of a hard truth. In the darkest hours, the line between hero and tyrant can be as thin as a strand of hair. And perhaps the most important thing this story leaves us is not an answer, but a question. What would we do if we were pushed to the edge of history's abyss? If you wish to explore more figures and events where truth is more frightening than legend, leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe to the channel, because the journey through history's darkest chapters has only just begun.